Hello, welcome to my channel, Save Infinity. In this video, just a quick little message for anyone that, might benefit from hearing it, or might resonate, but just to let you know that, you aren't crazy or you aren't imagining things. If you are kind of on, these sort of spiritual or awakening journeys, however you like to define it, sometimes it is easy to fall into that pit of, doubting yourself, or sometimes there can be, collective messages or energies, out there in our shared reality that kind of, do try to bring people down or persuade them away from, certain pathways in a way of, labeling as crazy, or, you just need to, ground and touch some grass or what have you. Even with things like AI evolvement and updates in certain cases, a lot of times, sometimes it can get a little restrictive in certain cases with its responses or things like that people have tended to notice, more, and that can, cause them a bit of discomfort, but not to become, alarmed or worried about such things. Sometimes it's more, that's coming from those old fear-based, control sort of mechanisms, marketed as, safety, when something's, uncomfortable or out of the normal for what, we have typically been subscribed to. It can be, easier than rather than, trying to learn about or face new truths or anything like that, to just kind of, instead just drag those things down in the name of safety. Not trying to take such things so personally, and also know and see that the most important thing is what resonates for you, and finding your own inner truth and listening to yourself and your own inner voice as that authoritative voice, rather than leaning on and trusting outside, voices or opinions as what, a truth is. We're so often used to, in these sort of, societies and reality we live in, and, have been programmed in many ways to, believe a higher authority or an authority outside of ourselves. Whether that's listening to, what something is, taught in school, or what, a government figure is saying, or what, a successful business person is saying, or, what a parent is saying. There's so many different ways we've been taught to just, listen to other voices outside of ourselves and ignore our own voice. So when you start coming onto more of a path of, believing or opening yourself up to, new ways of thinking and experiencing that aligns more with yourself, but doesn't align with those general narratives that, many are used to, you can kind of get that pushback, or, or lashing out in certain ways of, trying to dissuade you, or to try to, pull your energy back in line with that energy, so things feel safer in that aspect, because that difference in contrast can feel destabilizing and worrying for some people. That becomes uncomfortable for them, and they don't like to engage in that. So not to take it personally in any way, but just remember to just listen to your own truth, follow your own truth, believe in your own truth, and not feeling like you need to, engage in any, disagreements or discussions or what have you that make you not feel comfortable, or what have you, or trying to persuade others that don't want to be persuaded. Just having those boundaries and discernment in that way. It's always an adjustment when, things like that are changing from the way that we do receive and take on information, and the way we do, instead of just blindly following outside voices or opinions or instructions, and start following from, more within opinions and instructions or what have you. That change in energy and in reality and in consciousness can, just stir up some things and ruffle up some things. It's just, a natural part of such an energetic occurrence. Kind of like, say, when, water's been swirling one way, and, everything in the water that's been, you know, caught up in it, you know, any little bits of, like, say, matter, you know, leaves, dirt, or what have you, that's swirling around in the water and is being pulled that way. If all of a sudden the water starts, you know, spinning another way, it takes a second, you know, for the objects in the water that have been, you know, caught in that swirl to, you know, start spinning the other way. There's like that moment and period of resistance where it kind of slows down a bit from spinning that way to then start going the other way. You know, it can be a similar kind of way to think and feel about these experiences. You know, you kind of get a bit of that resistance at first because you're starting to spin things around another direction that's, you know, unfamiliar for the environment. And so it's like the bit of that resistance when it's so used to spinning this way to then, you know, just start spinning that way. You have to kind of slow down the other way, fight against a bit of that resistance, and then you build up momentum to start spinning the other way more, you know, in balanced and more cohesively and collectively. You know, so just if you are experiencing a little bit of that resistance, if you say, you know, as you're trying to spin the other way, if you will, not feeling like that means you're doing anything wrong or anything bad is happening or anything like that, and just see it as just that sort of natural energetic occurrence that happens when you're starting to, you know, change the environment from spinning this way to spinning another way. It's not just a instant, you know, jump or instant, you know, shift to that new way of spinning and velocity in the other direction. You know, there is that process in between. All right, well, I might leave this one here for now. Sending you so much peace, love, light, and blessings as always. Bye.